Bruxelles, je t'aime. Tu m'avais manqué. Bruxelles, je t'aime. Bruxelles, je t'aime. T'es ma préférée. Bruxelles, je t'aime. Bruxelles, je t'aime.
Hello and welcome to Bruxelles, je t'aime, Euronews' talk show all about the European capital of Brussels. On Brussels, my love, we break down some of the big stories of the week, examine what's at stake for you and for Europe. My name is Maeve McMahon. Thanks for joining us. Coming up this week, a couple of rotten apples or a broken system. We take a look at the shocking corruption scandal that rocked the European Parliament to its core. One of the faces, Greek MEP Eva Kaili, now stripped of her role as Vice President of the European Parliament. In over a week, dozens of raids took place here in Brussels and in Italy. Wads of cash were seized in a criminal investigation going on already for months. As we wait for more details, we take a look at the fine line between lobbying and corruption in the political corridors of Brussels and discuss what a proper EU ethics body that's fit for purpose should look like. And the never-ending pillar story. At a late-night meeting in Brussels on Monday night, Hungary lifted its veto on an EU directive that would impose a global minimum tax of 15%. In return, the EU promised to unblock much-needed recovery funds for Hungary. This means the EU could be one step further to ratifying its part of a global tax deal that would stop multinational corporations from dodging tax. Politics aside, we ask if this is a good deal for Europe, or if it could send European businesses fleeing at a time when the economy is in trouble. To talk about all these topics and much more, I'm joined here in our studio by the Irish Minister for European Affairs, Thomas Byrne. We're also joined by the former Dutch MEP and currently Director of Transparency International EU, Michiel van Hulten, and the Senior Fellow at German Marshall Fund, Jacob Kierkegaard. Welcome to you all. Thank you so much for being here. And as I said, some say it's foreign countries meddling in Europe. Others call it the Italian job. Before hearing the thoughts of our panellists on this big story that's shook Brussels, let's just recap on what exactly has been going on and why the European Parliament has hit the headlines for all the wrong reasons. Take a look.
Corruption in the European Parliament. And it's not just involving any old MEP, but one of its most high-profile vice presidents. Eva Kaili was arrested by Belgian police last week, suspected of lobbying on behalf of a Gulf state, allegedly Qatar. The Greek MEP is just one individual, as well as her partner and a former Italian MEP, who face charges of corruption, money laundering and being part of a criminal organisation. Others are alleged to be involved too, with authorities having already seized at least €1.5 million in cash. The scandal raises much larger questions than cash for influence, though. Is every politician so easily corrupted, and can they really be trusted? Whatever happens, the system is broken, and it will take a lot to regain the faith and confidence of the European people.
Christopher, pictures there. So first question to you all. Were you surprised? Thomas Byrne, we start with you.
Well, I think the magnitude of it is deeply shocking, and it is surprising, quite frankly, that this would happen in this day and age, but it has happened. And I'm very grateful to the authorities here in Belgium and in other countries as well, who've obviously been investigating this very, very thoroughly. Indeed. And have found this incredible evidence that people will find, as I said, deeply shocking.
And as I said, this has been going on for a while, their investigation. Your reaction to this big story?
No, I mean, old stool corruption. None of this crypto stuff, no secret bank accounts, anyway, just a good old suitcase of cash. I mean, to me, it just sounds, it signals people that are not afraid of the system. They don't think they're going to get caught. Why else would you have that amount of money at your home? And it obviously raises questions for the European Parliament, which recently voted that it should be allowed to meet everybody, not just registered lobbyists as MEPs. What are the roles of current MEPs vis-à-vis foreign governments, but also, as we've seen, what are the roles of former MEPs vis-à-vis foreign.
And let's bring in a former MEP yourself, Michiel van Hulten. You're now currently working for Transparency International. You're the head of the office here. So this is something obviously you've been keeping a very close eye on yourself.
We have, and I'm not shocked that there is corruption in the Parliament, but I am shocked by the scale of it, the sheer numbers involved, numbers of former MEP staff, but also the size of the amounts, and that's really unprecedented. And I think that the real concern here is that this may just be the tip of the iceberg. There will be further names in this scandal, but we also expect that there will be revelations in other areas.
And that's a similar stance, in fact, from another man who we spoke to who was not surprised. That's Oliver Hodeman. He's a researcher at Corporate Europe Observatory. That's a watchdog here in Brussels. And Oliver Hodeman has been investigating in these kind of situations and lobbying here in this town for some 26 years. We can take a listen now to his reaction.
Well, it's definitely one of the biggest lobbying and corruption scandals that I've seen. At the same time, I can't be surprised. What we're seeing here is just the tip of the iceberg. We have for many years been warning against the attempts by repressive regimes to interfere in EU decision-making, but it wasn't taken seriously. This happened because the European Parliament has failed to take action. It's a fact that decision-makers, including parliamentarians, they face very strong lobbying pressure on a daily basis. There are more than 25,000 professional lobbyists in Brussels, and that is why it's so important to have strong transparency and ethics rules, basically to protect democratic decision-making from undue influence.
So Oliver Hodeman saying that this happened because the EU has failed to take action. And of course, to take proper action, it would need political will, Thomas Burns. But I imagine this is not really something that you're discussing with other European affairs ministers.
I mean, this is hugely concerning, but I mean, this has happened because people decided to do something that was blatantly wrong and very seriously wrong, and if caught, risks serious imprisonment. So people have decided to do that. Now, I fully agree with my Taoiseach who said that we should have an EU-wide ethics body. Our ombudsman, the EU ombudsman, who's Irish as well, has been very strong on this as well, and I would agree with what she has proposed. But people are always going to break the rules. The point is that you disincentivise them as much as possible. You make sure the transparency is as clear as possible, and you make sure the penalties are as strong as possible. I imagine the penalties in Belgium for an offence like this are quite severe. I mean, it is mind-blowing what's going on, and we do need to do that. We have very strict lobbying legislation in Ireland as well, which does at least let people know who's meeting politicians or officials. That applies as well to our ambassadors all around the world, including here in Brussels.
But this idea, Michiel van Hulten, what Jacob there referred to, that MEPs are quite frankly untouchable, that regardless of whatever rules are in place, they don't feel that they will ever be held accountable.
Absolutely, and I think this is not a case of just foreign interference or just a rogue country or indeed just a few corrupt MEPs. This is a system that's rotten to its core, and the European Parliament has resisted for many years reforms that would make it accountable and more transparent and ensure the kind of lobbying rules that need to have. There's no compliance, there's no sanctions in the Parliament, so there's really a culture of impunity that I think allows this kind of incident to happen.
And one thing that shakes European politicians into action is when a scandal does take place. So could we see some action now after this?
Well, I couldn't imagine that, President Metsola and the Parliament's governing bodies do not feel that now is the time to step up, both when it comes, and I would say probably given that there's a former MEP, it's always easier to do something with former MEPs than your current members. And, I spent 20 years or more in Washington, where obviously the lobbying role of former members of Congress has for many, many years been a subject of controversy, and there are fairly strict rules now. Fine, this being the United States, money is still issues and things like that. But, very clearly the role of at least former MEPs here, I think there'll be a serious crackdown on that. And then we will see how strong the will is to also impose transparency on current MEPs. I'm not perhaps as optimistic on that front.
Well, you mentioned Roberta Metsola, and she was, of course, in Strasbourg this week, the President of the European Parliament, and she expressed fury, anger and sorrow. And she also used her speech to say that MEPs weren't exactly to blame. We can take a listen to what she said earlier this week in Strasbourg.
Make no mistake, the European Parliament, dear colleagues, is under attack. European democracy is under attack. The enemies of democracy, for whom the very existence of this Parliament is a threat, will stop at nothing. These malign actors linked to autocratic third countries have allegedly weaponized NGOs, unions, individuals, assistants and members of the European Parliament. Their malicious plans failed. Corruption cannot pay.
Furious Roberta Metsola there, Michiel van Hulten. Did you see that speech? And what's your reaction to how she reacted, essentially?
Well, it's a very powerful speech and very clever from a political communications point of view. But what she's really doing here is deflecting attention away from the Parliament and away from the Parliament's responsibility onto the specific actors involved in this case. And sure, there is a problem with malign foreign actors in Brussels. It's a huge problem. But this is really a European Parliament problem. The Parliament has allowed this situation to develop. The Parliament doesn't have the rules in place to deal with it. And the Parliament now needs to fix it.
And Thomas Byrne, it is a European Parliament problem, but as well, this story has gone absolutely viral. So it's a PR disaster for the European Union in general.
Oh, it is. When you see the photograph of the cash laid out on the table, I think that just says it all. I mean, the amount of it, like almost everybody will never have seen.
And we can take a look. In fact, our viewers can have a look at that picture. We can bring it up there in our screens.
That amount of cash ever in their lives. I mean, it is absolutely astonishing. And I mean, anyone who accepts that in a suitcase or in whatever method, or that, you know, and does this illegally, is an enemy of democracy themselves. And I think we should be clear about that. But whatever about the states or the actors who are providing this, if an MEP or any politician were to accept that, they themselves are what President Metsola spoke about.
And have you ever been offered cash?
No. No,
or gifts?
No. Well, we get gifts all the time, but we have very strict rules in the Oireachtas as to what we can accept. We can only accept, like, our donation limits are really, really low. I think about €1,000. Our gifts, we can accept €650 of gifts. I don't think I've ever received anything like that.
And in the Parliament, I think it's €150. That's the maximum of a gift that you can receive.
That's right.
When you were an MEP, did you have anyone approach you?
To offer cash, no. No. As an MEP, you receive gifts, you receive bottles of wine. Where it gets tricky is when MEPs are offered things like trips. You get invited to a conference, to a nice sunny destination, and then, you know, you sometimes have to wonder, is this really about the work, or is this about pampering an MEP so that in future you can go back to them and ask for a favour? And that's the real problem. And it's exactly that kind of petty corruption that's the real problem in the Parliament. It's not the bags full of cash. Of course, that's a huge problem now. But most cases involve much smaller amounts and much more subtle ways of trying to buy a vote.
What I see as well, and this doesn't involve corruption, I see lobbyists who put on huge pressure on politicians, and then politicians almost at that point feel obliged then to follow up or to deal with it, rather than looking at the information that's provided to them, considering it and making the decision. I think that's a big, big problem as well.
But of course, one thing is lobbying and another thing is corruption.
Yeah, but again, I mean, as Thomas just said, I mean, if you accept to receive a suitcase full of cash, you know, you are clearly part of the problem. But at the same time, you know, there is, and I agree with Michelle, there is this systemic issue that these were not people who thought they were going to get caught. You wouldn't do something as blatant as that if you thought somebody was watching. It's just, you know, too blatant. And that is really, you know, one thing that Parliament needs to address, this sort of culture and feeling of impunity, as we've already talked. And then this petty issue of sort of grease money or whatever you want to call it. But that's a much bigger grey area that I think you will have in almost any political system.
And I remember Ursula von der Leyen back in 2019, when she was given her mandate, she appointed Vera Jourova commissioner in order to help her introduce some sort of an EU ethics body. But then the plan and the proposal was just shoved in the bottom of the drawer. What should this ethics body look like, Michiel van Hulten?
Well, that's right, and the body was announced, but then there was simply no support in the Parliament for the kind of powers that you really need. I mean, you need the Parliament is in favour of an advisory body, but we think that you need a body that has the power to investigate, to launch its own investigations, and to make recommendations as to the sanctions that should be applied to individuals who don't stick to the rules. And that's something that's been anathema to the Parliament, I suspect to the Commission itself as well. And so this proposal has been stuck. Hopefully now the Commission will come forward with a strong proposal and the Parliament will give it support.
And we are all subject to similar scenarios in our home countries, or at least certainly I am, where there are bodies there who seem to have significantly more powers than the European Parliament are subject to, and even then people will question that they haven't got enough powers in our case, but it seems to be significantly more. They can investigate us. And
you mentioned Emily O'Reilly, that is the EU Ombudsman, and she was speaking earlier this week to many media here in Brussels, saying that the EU, for example, or the Parliament, when it comes to cyber attacks, they'll be very quick to react. But with something like this, she didn't sound very confident that real action could take place. But one man who has been really enjoying this scandal is the Hungarian Prime Minister, that's Viktor Orban. We can just take a little look at a tweet that he put out the other day. He said, "Good morning, European Parliament. The Parliament there is very seriously concerned about corruption in Hungary." Then he put out another tweet with, in fact, a picture of the suitcase that you mentioned, Thomas Byrne, earlier, saying, this is what the rule of law looks like in Brussels. Your reaction to that?
I mean, you could actually argue that he used the meme of the laughing, Ronald Reagan and others in the wrong way. Obviously, this is youthful use of social media. He needs to deflect from his own much more deep-rooted corruption issues.
But he has a point, no? I mean, if public
he has
servants are not clean...
He has a superficial point that, the pot calling the kettle black, whatever. I mean, he's in many ways mired, in my opinion, in far more serious corruption allegations himself. So he needs to deflect. It's a common political strategy.
But this story has also broken a lot of trust between politicians and regular Europeans out and about in the streets, and this is something that you'll be facing as well back home in Ireland.
Look, it's very important that the highest possible standards are maintained but also enforced as well, because we can't have a situation where people don't take the European Parliament seriously. I think MEPs should really seriously consider that now, when I hope proposals are put forward to implement what Ursula von der Leyen said, and in contrast to Viktor Orban, what our Prime Minister, our Taoiseach Micheál Martin said, calling for an EU-wide ethics body. That is the correct response in this particular scenario, and that needs to be as strong as possible and needs to cover all of the lawmaking process in the European Union.
And as the criminal investigation is underway, we're all asking ourselves as well how damaging this stain on the European Union and the institutions will be.
No, it's hugely damaging, and the Parliament has clearly shot itself in the foot when it comes to Hungary. But there's elections coming up in 18 months, and European elections, and it's in the Parliament's own interest to make sure that it takes rapid action now and decisive action, effective action, to make sure that that election campaign is not dominated by yet another scandal.
And how does it compare? You mentioned Washington earlier, Brussels and Washington, when it comes to cracking down on illicit lobbying.
Well, I mean, obviously, you have a generally much more open access to money, campaign financing. I mean, that's the sort of Washington political word for corruption. It's legal, right? You can give anonymously as much money as you want, so you don't even need to be technically corrupt. But over the years, as I said, you've had this recurring issue that particularly former members of Congress become very high-powered lobbyists, and they clearly peddle influence, including for foreign governments in Washington. So there have, over the years, been many such scandals, and you therefore have, an increasingly robust system in place of oversight. But it doesn't change the fact that money in American politics is just so enabled by the Supreme Court that, in many ways, I would certainly argue that, you wouldn't need to take suitcases of cash in Washington, because they could just deposit $1.5 million in your bank account anonymously and call it a campaign contribution. That's legal.
That is legal. Wow. Well, Jacob, you actually mentioned crypto earlier. And in fact, Eva Kaili, the Greek MEP, former Vice President of the European Parliament, she was Mrs. Crypto. She was the expert here in town and working on all legislation regarding crypto.
I'm very concerned about that industry. We've seen the case of the collapse of FTX and the complete lack of self-awareness, or apparently lack of application of normal accounting rules, etc. And I think the crypto industry is a problem, and they've been doing a massive lobbying effort in Brussels as well. And so that's clearly something that also will need to be looked at as part of this investigation.
Okay. And Thomas Byrne, I'd like to just conclude this section with you. Just a message there to people who are watching today, and they've lost all trust in the EU institutions. They don't trust politicians anymore. What would your message be to them concerning this story?
Well, I think the bad apple scenario, we shouldn't allow two bad or more bad apples kind of counter people's view of Parliament. Parliament is the House of the people, it's the House of the Representatives. The people can vote every 5 years for a new Parliament, and they should make sure that they take an active part themselves in elections, finding out who the candidates are and elect the right people. And that also includes the parties as well in Europe who decide who these candidates are. And if they know that there are ethics issues surrounding MEPs, they should not put them on party lists. In Ireland it's a bit different because each individual is elected themselves, so the public would have a direct say. That's not the case in the continent, and we're going to have to watch that as well.
Okay, so you reckon just a couple of rotten apples?
I just want to make my point. My point isn't that it's just a couple of rotten apples, but that shouldn't. The public should separate that from the institution. The institution is a very important part of our democracy, and it's belonging to the people. So the people need to take control of that by now pressure for an ethics body, pressure on those who've been found to be involved in this, and make sure that they take the elections really, really seriously as well.
Okay, and this year, of course, Ireland was celebrating 50 years inside the European Union. Final word about yourself, Michiel?
It's a systemic issue, and the European Parliament is in danger of losing trust, and they need to fix that problem.
Okay. Well, that is, I'm afraid, all we have time for this block. Thank you so much for your insights and thank you for watching. But stay with us, because after the break, we'll be telling you how a late night meeting in Brussels this week might have paved the way for a historic tax deal. See you soon on Euronews and Euronews.com. Welcome back to Brussels, my love, with me, Maeve McMahon, where we're taking a look back at a few European stories that caught our eye this week. Now, you might have seen EU heads of state and government were in town this week to discuss all the big topics of the year. But earlier in the week, on Monday in fact, a historic deal was struck that could see the implementation of the OECD global corporate tax rate of 15% across the bloc. It would impact multinationals with a turnover of at least 750 million euros. The minimum rate would be fixed at 15%, and the objective, well, to stop the largest businesses avoiding tax. That's, of course, if Poland agrees. I imagine you were all following this story very carefully. It's a big story, I'm sure, for Ireland.
Well, I mean, look, Ireland has played a big role in getting these negotiations over the line. It's this week in Brussels. Obviously, there's been still a lot of discussion about it among various parties, but ultimately, I think it's good for us in Europe. It's good for our citizens. It's good for Ireland, actually, in particular, because while we have always had as part of our offering, and it is only part of our offering, a competitive tax rate, we still need to be and want to be in the mainstream of the global economy. So it was a very important agreement for us to be part of, and it's very important to get it over the line.
Quick reaction, Jacob?
No, I mean, I basically agree. I mean, I think this is a agreement for the global public good, and I certainly hope that it will go through. I think it ultimately will go through because it's part of a broader package that European leaders this week have to conclude that it also involves funding for Ukraine and a whole bunch of other things that will be, shall we say, politically painful for the Polish government if they are perceived to be blocking the whole package. But then globally, look, I mean, we still have the US Congress to fully implement this in the United States. And therefore, it's a powerful transatlantic signal for the EU to send as well.
But don't forget, do you remember Joe Biden initially, wasn't he going for a 21% corporation tax? Initially.
He did, but when he passed his latest round of the the IRA, the
Inflation Reduction Act,
they actually chose ultimately not to implement language that was compatible with the OECD agreement because they didn't think it would pass Congress. So the US position on this is still, outside the US Treasury, is still not entirely clear.
Okay, and Michel?
Well, it's hugely important because you had this race to the bottom with corporate tax rates, and that meant there was less revenue for governments, and that means less spending on things like housing and education. So it's really important that there is this minimum tax rate, but also for reasons of money laundering and preventing money laundering, because you've seen this situation where there's been lots of destinations with zero or low tax rates, companies moving there out of visibility of the authorities, and making those places a very attractive place to try and hide your money as well. So also in order to deal with crime and corruption globally, it's important that we have this minimum tax rate.
Absolutely. And as you said, Jacob, it still needs, of course, to be formally agreed on and put in a written procedure, as Poland was looking for some clarifications. But there's already excitement in this town among many following tax in the Brussels bubble. We can take a look at a tweet by Benjamin Angel. He's the Director for Taxation at the European Commission. He put out a tweet saying, if confirmed, the EU will pave the way for a global ratification. This is a nice end to a roller coaster tax year and a new beginning for tax fairness.
He's absolutely correct.
Yeah.
And, you know, we're proud that Paschal Donohoe, as President of the Eurogroup and as our Finance Minister from Ireland, has played a key role in negotiating this and to get this over the line. It's really, really important for Ireland. And
you're confident no one will leave Ireland?
No, I mean, no, because, I mean, we'll still have a good corporation tax rate, but there's a lot of other things as well. I mean, Ireland is now one of the most educated countries in the world. We already have a lot of companies in Ireland who are not just putting in manufacturing and certainly not just putting in letterboxes. That day is long gone, but putting in really significant investment into our country in terms of research and development, in terms of advanced manufacturing. And that's really important to us, and those companies are still coming all the time. And we're making sure that our country is set up to make sure that we can welcome them and have the people there who are educated at the standard necessary to work there as well.
Not going anywhere. Jacob?
No, I basically agree. I mean, the idea that corporate tax rates are the sole purpose, the sole decision for serious foreign direct investment, multinational companies deciding where to locate, produce, do research and development is wrong. So it's really important, I think, to recognize that this global deal and the implicit sanctions that it entails is really a strike at the sort of offshore Caribbean island nations that have clearly made a business out of hiding profits. They call it tax optimization, but it's really tax avoidance. And that's why the global application, or at least the application in the large jurisdictions in the US, EU, etc., is going to be so important. But it's not going to have, I think, a material impact on whether or not people invest in individual European countries or in the United States, for that matter. It's other issues that play that biggest role.
But we have been speaking here to representatives of the business community, and they are expressing some reservations. Of course, they've known about this for a while, but we can take a listen to hear the stance of Marielle Caruana now from Business Europe.
If the EU does adopt the Pillar 2 directive, let's wait and see what will happen in the next few days and weeks. I think that will be a very important breakthrough. But, and that is a very important but, with taxation, the devil is always in the detail. We've got to be aware that Pillar 2 introduces some very complex rules. At this stage, businesses now need more guidance. They now need more simplification measures to make the rules workable and to make sure that they are implemented effectively. Let's not forget that the rules come at a time when the EU economy faces other challenges. So it's important from an EU perspective to focus on the overall package that it is offering to potential investors to attract long-term investments.
So Marielle Caruana there from Business Europe, you disagree with everything she said based on your facial expression?
I disagree everything, but I would just say that, compared to the status quo, the reality is that right now you have even more complex corporate tax rules in individual member states. Some countries have higher rates than others, and this is actually something that some companies have been taking advantage of. So this notion that, we need increased transparency, etc. Well, harmonization, 15% for everyone, is a pretty significant harmonization and actually simplification for facing companies, I would argue.
And a final word from yourself, Michiel van Hulten?
Well, I think this is really great progress, but we also need much more progress on the front of reporting corporate tax transparency and making sure that we know which companies pay taxes where, so that the public can see whether or not the companies are paying taxes in the countries where they do business.
Thomas Byrne, did you want to say something?
No, just that I think this is a very positive development overall, but there's still more work to be done on it.
Still more to be work to be done. Well, perhaps a Christmas gift, perhaps then, for all those working on tax here in Brussels. But that's, I'm afraid, all we have time for on this topic. Whatever happens, countries will still have a year or so to transpose, of course, that directive into law. Thank you so much for your insights. And thank you for watching. Stay with us now on Euronews and Euronews.com. Hello and welcome back to Brussels, my love, with me, Maeve McMahon, where we're taking a look at some of the European stories that caught our eye this week. Well, one story that stood out to us this week was a poll because it impacts all of your countries. Denmark, the Netherlands and Ireland. We can take a look. It's a Eurobarometer survey that was published this week, and it says in those countries, the people in those countries, the Netherlands, Denmark and Ireland, are the most supportive of the EU actions in Ukraine. You can take a look there. And those who are not as supportive are over in Cyprus, Slovenia and Greece. There you go. Surprised or not? Jacob?
No, I mean, I don't think it's very surprising that the two Orthodox Christian countries are among those that have the least support for this war. But on the other hand, I'm very encouraged that the main, smaller open economies tend to be very supportive of it. They stand for the rule of law. They oppose military aggression, and I think this poll reflects it. And I would hope that certainly when it comes to my own country, Denmark, but arguably also the Netherlands, which are traditionally among the sort of frugal, shall we say, European countries that tend to oppose common European funding. I hope a poll like this will convince national politicians this is actually, as we move into the next phase, once the war is over and won by Ukraine, there is a major reconstruction bill that I think the EU will have to foot the vast majority of, and that will almost certainly include include additional common fiscal measures. And I hope that the Danish and Dutch and Irish governments will look favourably with regard to that.
And I mentioned that it was actually Slovenia, but it's Slovakia I meant who have the least support there. Your reaction to that poll?
I'm not surprised. You might know us here in the Irish Parliament, where lots of the opposition tend to sort of not directly criticise what's happening, but sort of skirt around it because, they had different views before the war started. But the Irish public, I mean, that's obvious on the ground. We see the Irish public and the Irish nation from the top down has taken Ukrainians into their homes, into their hearts, into our country in huge numbers. That's one aspect of the EU response that we actually opted into. The refugee programme, the Temporary Protection Directive, we didn't have to take part in that because we're not part of it. But we decided to do it because it's the right thing to do. And now we have given an incredible welcome. And look, there was always going to be difficulties with it. It's quite hard to find accommodation. Winter is in now. But everybody in Ireland has pulled out the stops for the Ukrainians in particular.
But the question now, of course, will it last, Michiel?
Well, that's always tricky, but in the case of the Netherlands, of course, there was the shooting down of flight MH17, for which Russia was responsible, for which people have now also been convicted, and that obviously creates a sense of solidarity with the Ukrainian people who are also under attack from the Russians, and so I think that the support will maintain for quite a while.
And did you see the Sakharov Prize was awarded as well this week in the European Parliament? It was awarded to the people of Ukraine. President Zelensky, of course, couldn't go physically to pick it up. But I guess your reaction to that, Michiel?
Well deserved. I think that it was hard to see how anyone else could receive it this year. There's many human rights defenders, but I think that especially because we're so close to that conflict and we see the conflict in our daily lives with all the refugees here, the impact it has on our lives, we feel for them, we are with them, and the bravery we've seen displayed by the president but also by the Ukrainian people has just been unbelievable, and I think it's well deserved.
He's a total hero in the eyes of Europeans. Just last week he was on the front page of Time as well, and he was on the front page of, he was awarded the European of the Year.
And he's an incredible man, Zelensky. I mean, you may know near where we both come from, the TLT Theatre. He appeared there as a comedian a number of years ago and to a show for Ukraine.
In which theatre?
The TLT in Drogheda, the Tommy Lely Theatre, yeah. And this has been remembered there, but I mean, it is such a change. He's obviously put those skills to use, but he's obviously a man of incredible steel as well to not just sit this out, but to sit this out in a really effective way and to build up that network of support all around the Western world. Final word about yourself, Jacob Kierkegaard?
No, I mean, I absolutely agree. I mean, he's clearly man of the hour, now man of the year in Time, and the Ukrainian people is really, in many ways, also standing up and fighting for European ideals.
And his wife, Madame Zelenska, is also wonderful and has been doing amazing things as well.
Absolutely.
Okay. Thank you so much for being with us. Thank you so much for your insights, and thank you so much for watching. I'm afraid that is all we have time for this edition of Bruxelles Je t'aime. But we'll see you soon right here on Euronews and Euronews.com.